Let me ask you about something else. The pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University in particular. We saw the police moving in overnight after the students had broken into a historic building and used violence to do that. You've been very critical of people who are trying to suppress these protests at all, to which I would say I absolutely believe in the right to protest peacefully. I believe in free speech emphatically as you do. I think we're in agreement on that. But if people are going to do things like chant about an intifada, and I know you picked me up on X earlier about do I know the meaning of intifada? Well, here's what I know. There have been 2 intifadas involving the Israel-Palestine conflict, and it led to many thousands of deaths. But both were driven by violence. I mean, they weren't peaceful intifadas. By very definition, these uprisings were violent and involved extreme violence, particularly the second one, which involved blatant acts of terrorism. So that is my understanding of an intifada. There have also been many other things in the last 30 years in the world which have been dubbed intifadas. And the one common denominator is they've all involved violent uprisings. In fact, I can't think of, unless you can correct me, when was the last...
Yeah, I can.
When was the last entirely peaceful intifada?
So in 2011, in the Arab Spring, the Tunisians rose up peacefully. I'm sure you supported them, I did, against their dictator, Ben Ali. The Egyptians rose up in Tahrir Square. I think you supported them, I certainly did, against Mubarak, against these dictators that we in the West had been supporting. Those were referred to. You can go back and look at the Arabic press. You can look at the BBC Arabic coverage as intifadas. We can go back further. In fact, we can go back to a violent uprising that we all supported, the Warsaw Ghetto, Piers. The Warsaw Ghetto, right? Polish Jews standing up against the Nazis. Do you know how the US Holocaust Memorial Museum describes the Warsaw Ghetto on its Arabic page? It calls it the Warsaw
But you wouldn't categorize
Hold on, let me finish my point. Let me finish my point, and then you come back in. The Warsaw Intifada, we're not calling the Jews in Poland who stood up against the Nazis as terrorists. So no, I don't believe that intifada in and of itself is a terroristic or violent phrase. And the first intifada was largely non-violent for the first year. Palestinians were killed at a rate of 27 times the number of Israelis who were killed. Rabin, do you remember Rabin, Nobel Peace Laureate?
Yeah.
He said, break their bones. The violence came largely from the Israeli side in the first intifada. So just to be clear, that's what intifada means, uprising. These students are not calling for violence. They're not. If they wanted to, they'd call for violence. They'd call for suicide bombings. They're calling for an uprising, Piers.
Yeah, but they're calling for an intifada. They're chanting about intifada. And
Which you and I have a different definition of, and you're not an Arab, so with respect, I'm telling you, intifada is used for peaceful uprisings as well.
Hang on, just to narrow the debate onto this, there have been 2 intifadas in this conflict, and they've both been violent.
And I just told you the first one was largely non-violent.
Well, it was only non-violent for the first few...
Israel,
it was actually only non-violent for the first few months. It then became...
The violence was from Israel.
Well, it became increasingly violent.
And there were many Israelis with live ammo.
Well, there were many deaths.
Yes, and I would too, if I was doing...
OK, but here's my point. They were both violent. So when those protesters chant about intifada, if you are a Jewish student on that campus and you see people chanting in a mob, intifada, you know what that means. Those people want to do you physical, violent harm. That's the problem.
Okay. Let's break this down then, Piers. I know you're in the UK. You haven't been in the US recently or on campus.
I was there 2 weeks ago.
I've been to campus.
I was actually there 2 weeks ago, walking past Columbia. Well, hang on, I was there 2 weeks ago.
But you were not. But you weren't on any of these campuses while this has been going on for the last 7 days since the arrest took place in Columbia last Thursday.
Yeah, I'm not out of sight, out of mind.
It all kicked off last Thursday.
I know where Columbia is. I was in New York.
But I'm just saying. Agreed. And there was no violence when you walked past it. So 7 days ago, that's when it kicked off, when the police arrested 108 students, many of them Jewish. Let's just talk about Jewish students. I've actually spoken to Jewish students, Jewish professors. Columbia's Jewish professors have come out to condemn media coverage of what's going on and saying this isn't anti-Semitic.
Some have.
This isn't violent. People like Bruce Robbins. Many have. Keith Gesson, Bruce Robbins, Joseph Howley, whose grandfather fled the Nazis.
You say it's not violent. We saw them breaking into a building, smashing windows and being violent.
That was last night. OK, I'll come back to that, Piers. Let me finish a sentence, and I will. They've all said that these protests are not violent. They're not anti-Semitic. These slogans are anti-Semitic. There are Jews in the encampment. Zeteo, my new media company, went and asked a Jewish student on campus who's part of these protests to write a piece for us. And he did. Jonathan Ben Menachem, people could go read it. And he said the real threat is coming not from Palestinian protesters, but from the police who are assaulting and arresting Jewish students on campus. We Jewish students are in the encampment. We're praying. We're
But
doing
I've
rituals.
seen
This is
video
not
of Jewish students being
anti-Semitic.
harassed, Jewish students not being allowed to go onto their campus. I've seen other Jewish students absolutely
and a lot of those,
terrified
Piers,
about what's happening. I've seen other Jewish professors who've been
this is the problem with
enraged
watching
by
it all.
other Jewish professors not allowed to go in and teach. I've seen the Columbia say everyone has to stay at home.
Come on. Piers, OK, let's just break this down. You just mentioned Shai Davidai, the Columbia business professor who's become a big martyr on the right. This is a guy who referred to his fellow Jewish professors as capos. I don't think you agree with that language, Piers. I don't think you think you should call Jewish professors capos. No. That's the kind of language he does. He's been targeting Muslim students on campus. He demonized Muslims praying on Columbia campus. I'm assuming you don't agree with that. And I would just say this, just on the campuses. Last night in UCLA, there was massive violence. It was carried out by pro-Israel protesters. It's on camera. The LA Times are reporting.
Well, there was violence on both sides.
Encampments. No, read the LA Times reporting, Piers. They attacked. Counter-protesters turned up late at night in front of us. It's on tape. They attacked Palestinian protests. They attacked the encampment. They threw fireworks into the encampment. And on Sunday, by the way, at UCLA, one Israel counter-protester went up to a black Palestinian student and called him the N-word and spat on him. I watched the video. We're going to play videos. I watched that video. You didn't mention that in your New York Post column in which you condemned Columbia students. You didn't mention the guy at UPenn, pro-Israel protester, who turned up with a knife in his belt. You didn't mention the 3 Palestinian students who were shot earlier this year while wearing keffiyehs. One of them is now disabled, right? None of that gets any mention. We just cherry pick certain things.
You're trying to
say,
paint a picture.
Look, anti-Semitism out of control.
This works both ways, Mehdi. I haven't seen you quoting any of the Jewish students who've been everywhere on the airwaves saying they feel harassed.
Well, you're wrong. Piers, you're wrong.
Really?
You're wrong, Piers.
In this interview?
Well, you're wrong. I have.
In this interview?
No, in this you said have I?
No, I meant in this interview.
Obviously, in this interview.
You said
in this interview, if
you said you didn't see me in my New York Post column.
Let me go back to my point. Okay.
Yeah, I genuinely feel.
Yeah, so we're talking about. I didn't know.
I've seen many Jewish students. Hang on, let me finish. I've seen many Jewish students talking about how intimidated they've been feeling, how harassed they've been feeling. I've seen video footage that supports their reasons for feeling that way. I've seen the mob chanting Intifada, the mob chanting from the river to the sea. Now, we can argue about the subtle nuances of these words and phrases.
We are going to argue about
it. If you're a Jewish student and you're not allowed to go in and study because you're being harassed by a mob chanting Intifada, I'm sorry, I think that crosses a line.
Well, first of all, neither of us are Jewish, and you don't get to speak for all Jews. I'm telling you, there are many Jews disproportionately represented in the I'm not. I'm telling you not to speak for all Jews. I never spoke for all Jews.
I don't speak for all Jews.
Students
I'm saying there were many Jews on the airwaves talking about this.
And I'm saying there are many Jews who said the opposite, including for Zateo, including on CNN, on Fareed Zakaria on Sunday. So we can have that argument. I'm saying, what about the pro-Palestinian students who've also been doxxed, harassed, assaulted? You don't mention them. You didn't mention them in a very long New York piece. You didn't write a piece about 3 Palestinian students who got shot. Thank God no Jewish students have been shot. They got shot. One is now disabled earlier this year. In fact, this week, a guy turned up at UTenn with a knife in his belt. I think that's much worse than shouting Intifada, which, as we've just discussed, is not an anti-Semitic phrase. So we can argue all day long. What's happening on campuses is bad. The way we de-escalate, like with the Middle East, is we sit down and talk. We don't go with violence. It's funny that you mentioned Intifada and saying it was violent the first time round. Well, it wasn't. It started peacefully and the Israelis cracked down. Same thing happened in New York. It started peacefully. The police have cracked down. Did you see the images last night, Piers, of police pushing protesters downstairs? Surely you don't agree with that.
I saw one of the protesters making a speech in which she demanded humanitarian aid because they were all hungry.
That's not what I asked, Piers. Nice deflection. Did you see the student being thrown downstairs? Did you see the professor at Emory being assaulted by the police?
I've not seen the piece of footage you're talking about. I did see the police forcefully throw them all out. And I think it was long overdue, when students break into a building, when they commit vandalism, when they commit vandalism, trespass, they hold people against their wishes, right? They're going to face potential criminal charges.
Like all protests throughout history, Piers.
Well,
hold on, like the Vietnam War protests, like the civil rights protests,
they may well face criminal.
They
might face criminal prosecution.
I thought this show is called Uncensored.
Yes.
Maybe you should rename it Piers Morgan Censored if you're in favour of cracking down on protests.
Listen, I do believe in uncensored. That's why I let you come on and abuse me, Mehdi. That's half the fun. But I would also... No, but on a serious point, I as someone who supports free speech and the right to protest, I followed this very closely, and I've not written anything before now. But when I saw the scenes in the last 48 to 72 hours, I did think it crossed a line. And I do think if you're a Jewish student and you're feeling harassed and intimidated and being refused entry by a mob chanting Intifada and from the river to the sea, I think that crosses a line.
Can I say two brief things before we finish?
Yeah.
Very quickly. One is, I hope you do write a column about what's happening to pro-Palestinian students, including Jewish students. The violence that's being meted out to them at places like UCLA, Emory. I don't know if you've seen the scenes from UT Austin, where Governor Greg Abbott has basically sent in a fascist, paramilitary-looking police force to crack heads. Right? I hope you'll condemn that in the interest of free speech. And number two, look, we can argue all day about broken windows at Columbia University. I don't support violence. I don't support property damage. That's my own personal thing. But I know there's a history of doing that in good causes. But the reality is some broken glass at Columbia University by people who are protesting a war in which every single one of Gaza's 12 universities have been destroyed or damaged, more than 200 Palestinian educators in Gaza killed, more than 4,000 students killed.
Yeah. Here's the point, though. This has been a massive distraction from the war. And that's my other problem with it, is you've got a bunch of students in New York causing merry hell, distracting everyone's attention from what is actual, genuine merry hell for people in Gaza.
Actually, it's not merry hell. That's a right-wing media take on what's being going on.
I'm not right-wing.
Your depiction of it.
I'm not right-wing.
I've been to I didn't say you. I didn't say you. I said that's the right-wing media depiction of it.
Well, I've
been to college campuses where this is going on. Well, I was at a college campus on Saturday, Piers. Were you? There was no violence. There was no merry hell. So that's a smear.
Last 48 hours, there has been merry hell there. Yeah, there has.
Not at the college campus I was at. There's dozens of campuses all over the country. And at Columbia, the hell is from the police. There are lots of universities, Piers, where this is not kicking off because the university administrators have been smart. They've talked to students. They've listened to their demands. Their demands, by the way, is not Intifada. Their demand is for divestment from companies profiting off of Israel, a reasonable demand. In other places like MIT, Brandeis, other universities, they've actually talked to students. It's in Columbia where this insane president who should quit decided to call in the police outrageously.